to just speak peace, love, and compassion into this space. And also take 1 second to honor the lives of the women and men that have been cut short as a result of discrimination, oppression, violence, racism, which are enabled by a supremacist ideology, moved also by power and privilege. So I just want to take 1 second of silence, and I'd like us to do that to honor the women and the men whose lives have been cut short by violence, racism, oppression, and hate. Okay. Now, my topic today deals with incorporating an intersectionality approach into our work. And, I was introduced to the intersectionality framework a couple of years ago, and I found it rather interesting and realized how important incorporating this framework is into the work that I do and into the work of other development practitioners. Now, it is not the only framework, but it's one of the many frameworks which can be utilized to enhance the work that we do as individuals, as activists, and as leaders, because you cannot solve a problem that remains invisible. You cannot change outcomes without understanding how they came about. And to solve problems and issues, we must identify and acknowledge their existence and how they affect individuals and groups of people within our societies, our families, and our communities. The issues that individuals experience, they are not isolated, nor are they independent of each other. And when we speak about women and girls, we speak about multiple layers of issues which converge to affect their progress, their advancement, and their fulfillment to be sustainable and self-sufficient within their own sphere of life. So you might have someone who was sexually assaulted, and this is not just a gender, sex, power, or racial problem for development workers. You also have that convergence of all these issues coming together to form layers in the life of this individual. So how do these convergence of gender stereotypes or race stereotypes or sex stereotypes play out within the family, the community, and our wider society? And it is imperative that we understand how to analyze these so that we can effectively and adequately respond to those that we serve in our various capacities. So an intersectional analysis or approach allows us to see who is included, who is excluded, the types of power dynamics that are at play, the relationships that are at play, and how those affect experiences and identities. With the knowledge that identities are not these, single isolated experiences. Identities are the beliefs, the experiences, the environments, the challenges that we face. So with this, I will just quickly go to a slide presentation to share my screen. Okay, so share screen. So yeah, is everybody seeing my screen?
Yeah, we are seeing your screen, Sheena.
Okay. Yes, hello. Yeah. Okay, I thought I was hearing somebody calling. Oh, all right. So we just dive in. Now it's incorporating an intersectionality approach in our work. And as we know, this is Striving Thursday, and I'm presenting, to the ambassadors here today as a WorldPulse ambassador myself. So I love this quote when I read it from Renee Edu Lodge. She says, I don't want to be included. Instead, I want to question who created the standard in the first place. After a lifetime of embodying difference, I have no desire to be equal. I want to deconstruct the structural power of systems that marked me out as different. I don't wish to be assimilated into the status quo. I want to be liberated from all the negative assumptions that characterize that my characteristics bring. And I just love that, because a lot of times as women, we try to assimilate and we try to um, go with the status quo. But this is about challenging the status quo and challenging the systems that mark us out as different, so that we are oppressed, violence is perpetrated against us, and that we cannot live and feel safe in our societies. So what is intersectionality? The Oxford Dictionary defines it as the interconnected nature of social characterizations such as race, class, and gender, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage, a theoretical approach based on such a premise. So what does the person who coined the term intersectionality, and one thing she transparently stated is that there were various human rights actors and advocates who have been using and advocating for an intersectional approach in their work, and for governments and institutions to realize how issues converge to cause barriers for persons' advancement. And she gave that honor to the women before her. However, she was the one that coined the term during her presentation on looking at how women, especially women of color, are affected in different areas of their lives. So she says, and I adapted this from her, that intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the multiple ways that varying forms of inequality, discrimination, oppression, and disadvantage sometimes compound themselves and create obstacles that are often not understood within conventional ways of thinking. And when conventional ways of thinking is brought out there, is that you, for example, you have a woman who has been sexually assaulted, or she's experiencing some type of domestic violence. Traditionally, or the conventional way of thinking is to look at just that isolated issue that the woman may have been spoken about, rather than looking at all the other issues which frame and contribute and enable violence in this woman's life, but also act as barriers from her getting the support to recover, to heal, and to live a fulfilled and abundant life. So this was Kimberly Crenshaw. She's the person who coined the term intersectionality. So, she is actually a law professor and social theorist. And, as I said, she coined the term in 1989 during her paper presentation on demarginalizing the intersection of race and sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. The theory emerged 2 decades earlier, however, when Black feminists began to speak about the white middle class nature of the mainstream feminist movement. And this is something I've always spoken about, because women who are of African descent and with Black and brown bodies experience things differently than our other female counterparts. The women who are residing in India, they experience things differently than we do as Black and brown women. So it's understanding the intersections of our lived realities and how those truly act as a barrier to us really moving forward and living a fulfilled life. So what does others have to say about intersectionality? So this is from the Global Development Team out of Canada, and they basically said, intersectionality recognizes that individual circumstances, aspects of identity, race, disability, gender, etc., systems of power, ableism, sexism, racism, etc., and institutions, governments, economy, legal systems, etc., shape both individual and collective lived experiences. And this is just one that I love and put in there. Intersectionality is the intersecting systems of privilege and oppression. So someone is privileged, someone has power, and they make that conscious decision or even unconscious decision based on their socialization to oppress, to violate, and to discriminate against the other. I would like to say this. Sometimes persons are judged because of their privilege, and all of us in this room have some measure of privilege. And we should not be judged and feel guilty for the privilege that we have. However, we must make a conscious decision to utilize that privilege in a way that restores human dignity, that speaks out against atrocities, and that supports those who are vulnerable and marginalized and discriminated against. So I'd like you to meet Simone. Simone is Black and she is a woman. And she should be proud. However, sadly, many people do not like Simone. Simone faces oppression, violence, and discrimination for being Black, being a woman, not having an academic education, living in a rural district, for having an invisible disability, her religious practices, her language, and socioeconomic class. So we realize how many things converge there and could form various barriers from Simone really moving forward, and also Simone experiencing aspects of discrimination and oppression. So here we go. This is Simone. So these layers, right, that compound themselves and create obstacles to Simone seeking and receiving adequate support. If we add another layer to these already existing layers, we can say Simone is a victim of sexual assault and rape. If we add another layer, we can say Simone is an adult victim of child abuse. If we add another layer, we can say Simone is 55 years old. And another layer, she has 4 children and 2 as a result of rape. So these are all the convergences that come together. So as practitioners, as advocates, as leaders, when we work with individuals, when we work with groups of people, when we work with communities, it is imperative that we analyze using the intersectionality framework their lived experience and how we can tailor the type of support necessary to help restore human dignity to those that we serve. So, you know, many organizations actually, and public and private institutions, would only take into account one issue, and most times is the most prevalent or predominant issue, which may be the lack of education or the type of abuse Simone has experienced. However, there are many other layers which are not being addressed to enable Simone to live a fulfilled and abundant life where she is sustainable, self-reliant, becomes a productive asset to herself, her children or child, and society itself. So let's look at some of these layers, you know, or some of these convergences or issues that may affect Simone. One is education. She lacks education, and that can act as a barrier to her advancing. So when you look at Simone, you're not just seeing a Black woman, you also ought to see all these other issues and problems and areas that converge and affect Simone from moving forward. Her race, right? And sadly, when politicians speak about race, they speak about the color of someone's skin, or they speak about their facial features, right? It's not about the group of people or the geographical location that you associate with. Her gender, right? Her gender is not her sex. Her sex is that she's a woman based on biology. Her gender is the social attributes that society has constructed and applied to her because she is a woman. And then her gender identity may be that she is gay, she is bisexual, she's transgender. So we have to take all these things into account. You know, I spoke about her sex, being woman, her age. You know, a lot of times we practice discrimination against persons because of their age. And we are seeing now there's a movement which I love, and that movement for youth to take charge. But while we're doing that, we're also excluding a lot of other people within that process who can contribute and who have also experienced grotesque acts of violence against them. And we look at religion. So Simone religious practices may also be taken into account, how she is supported, who supports her, and what type of support she receives from institutions. So we're gonna meet Simone again, and there is something called the flower of power, which actually is a great activity to do with any group, where persons then realize the privilege and the power that they have, and how those separate them or puts them in front or puts them behind of the others within that room. So we look at the family name, it's taken into account. A lot of times persons who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, whose family name is not considered or regarded, they receive little support from those in authority, from institutions. We look at family status. What is Simone's family status? You know, is it one that she's on the upper class or the middle class, or is it that she's on the lower end of the social strata? Well, we spoke about her education. What type of education does she have? Could she advocate for herself? Or does her education disempower her and enables her to live in environments of violence and abuse because she is unable to work and seek job security? Her ancestry, those things are also taken into effect. Who are you? Where did you come from? What tribe do you associate with? And all these different layers of discrimination that comes into play when we work with individuals and communities. The geographical location, and we understand within all our societies, each geographical location is different, and there are certain layers of discrimination and biases that comes into effect. So how do we understand our own biases about an ethnic group living 50 miles from us? How do we understand our own biases against our neighbor, so that we can truly and authentically provide a service that will restore human dignity? Employment. Is Simone employed? Can she sustain herself? And how do we now navigate the systems to get some form of sustainable employment for Simone? Is Simone from a rural or urban area? All those things are taken into account when persons seek some type of support, they seek redress, even in the legal system. Is Simone from the rural area that even politicians don't even consider? That will take into account how they will really respond to Simone's case. Is she from an urban area that is well regarded, well respected, as affluent? Those things will be taken into account. Her language. We understand how language can act as a barrier, how language can be discriminated against, and how we ourselves can discriminate against someone's language because we may not be familiar, because our socialization and our construction was designed to view somebody else's language as different, and that difference causes that separation to enable different forms of violence. Her place of birth, where was she from, where was she born? You know, and we understand things like your place of birth and so forth affect how people respond and provide help, especially when you're speaking about migrants, when you're speaking about women from certain areas, how that affects, you know, the work that they have. Gender again. And gender is that social construction and those social attributes that society attaches to a person because of their sex. And a lot of times when persons identify outside of that box, then they are discriminated against. Her age, you know, I spoke about that earlier. Her race, you know, her ethnicity, her disability, and she may have an, I said, an invisible disability, or she may have a visible disability. So how would these variant types of disability affect Simone in getting the support that she needs to really move forward and advance as a woman and whole? Her religion, her body image. How do we, look at persons having that socialization again, viewing persons of different body types, body shapes, and how does society look at that in the essence of providing an adequate response to someone who has been discriminated against, who has been oppressed, and who is experiencing varying types of violence? Her socioeconomic class. Does she has disposable income? Does she has money at all? And having those resources will enable her to have access to education, access to healthcare, access to childcare, access to having a home and having that security of that home. Her marital status. We understand a lot of women are discriminated against because of their marital status. So one, they're discriminated against because they are not married, or two, they're discriminated against because they are married and they may not have children within that marriage. So those are some of the factors that will affect, Simone. Her sexual orientation and, her sex. So this is Simone. So Simone could represent the constituents you serve or the client that you are serving right now. So why is it important to incorporate an intersectional framework in the work that we do? One, incorporating an intersectionality framework makes the invisible visible and the unconscious conscious. So when we incorporate this type of framework, we're able now to truly begin to unpack the issues that are affecting Simone. We're able to unpack the issues that are acting as barriers to Simone getting help, and also the issues that enable discrimination and violence. Two, it enables it enables us to understand the multiple ways that privilege and oppression enable varying forms of inequality, discrimination, and oppression, and how these compound themselves, creating layers of disadvantages for an individual and or group, and obstacles that are often not understood within conventional ways of thinking. So this basically begins to challenge the systems established by governments, within our own organization, by the private sector, by society, and by traditional norms and behaviors and actions. And three, it gives us the ability to center our work on social justice, taking into account individuals or groups of people overlapping identities and lived experiences to better understand the complexity of discrimination, inequity, and disadvantages, and how these act as barriers to their advancement, success, access, and control. Four, it develops a client-centered approach where our work is centered on the client's recovery, healing, and sustainability in all areas of her or his life. Four, it enables us to identify the types of systemic, structural, institutional, symbolic, and political violence which acts as barriers to equity and equality, and enable violence and implicitly or explicitly restricts access and control. And when symbolic violence is something that we often overlook. And it basically says that persons over time condition themselves to believe that the violence or the acts of discrimination and hate and injustice that is being perpetrated against them, that they deserve it, because again of the social conditioning that we have experienced and groups of people have gone through over time. Number six, it enhances our advocacy and lobbying, enabling us to develop strategic approaches to drive social change and transformation at all levels: the individual, the family, the community, the societal level, through government institutions, private and NGO sector, using the domains of change. So understanding what are our entry points, Who are the influencers within these domains of change? How can we access them? Who are included in the discussions around the table? Who are excluded and why? Are these spaces for having this dialogue token spaces, or are they spaces that are authentic, that give rise to the voices of the invisible and unheard voices among us? 6, it allows us to rethink partnerships and identify key stakeholders to collaborate, partner, and build key working relationships with. Because when you look at the intersectionality framework, we understand that we cannot do everything by ourselves. So there is that need to now align ourselves with other stakeholders who can provide the service necessary for this particular individual or groups of people, so that they can have that holistic approach to working with individuals and communities. And what can you do to include an intersectionality framework to enhance your work? Incorporate an intersectionality lens in your work to enhance your work. And incorporating that goes by understanding what exactly is the intersectionality framework and how I can incorporate this into my work. Identify what principles or models speak to you personally and why, because there may be certain principles and models in this framework that speaks directly to you and that you can utilize and, you know, in your work to enhance it. Understand that this is not the only theory, framework, or model for you to work with. It's an addition to enhance your work. Understand that there is a danger in adopting an ideology or model rather than adapting it. And this does not only go to the intersectionality framework. A lot of times in our work as development practitioners, as advocates, and as leaders, we begin to adopt ideologies rather than adapt them. And when we adopt ideologies, our lens becomes narrow. And so we believe this is the only way that we can get this work done. Critically reflect on our work and the issues we address to identify the layers of oppression that people face. Identify ways or areas of our work where we can include an intersectionality approach, and center our work on social justice structures, which include equity and equality to restore human dignity. Understand that our work with individuals and communities is not isolated. And understand that we cannot do everything. As such, finding strong allies, even persons, you know, we may assume is an enemy, to provide the areas of service that we are unable to. And finally, realize that the issues people face have multiple layers, and each layer needs to be addressed to provide holistic support to the constituents, communities, and individuals we serve. Thank you very much.